Welcome all in, everybody, to another edition of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'm Zach Farmer. That's Thomas Dunn. And Saturday gave us some interesting results around the league. We got another solid win from St. Mary's, continuing their 5-0 start, perfect in WCC play. Washington State still hanging with them, everything else. USF also continuing their kind of strong play. Like they are now up. They're now hanging around there in fourth place in the WCC. They are starting to look a little bit more maybe like what we thought we would see before. We'll get into that. We'll get into Santa Clara's big night as well. The Gavalugov show down at the Levy Center as he went for 37 in that one. And before we get started, make sure you hit subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you are listening to the podcast. But I wanted to start on a note. Actually, you know what? No. We're going to start with Santa Clara. We're going to go there first, and let's get to the Gavalugov show because this was one that kind of came out of nowhere. He started because Brenton Napper was banged up. He got the start, and Santa Clara and Sosh really took it to LMU. That 103-72 victory just the other night.
Yeah, I mean they just beat him down. I mean, you have like a nice old description of what happened. You bring out the whole list. It was a drubbing. It was a prize fight with no referee. It was, something, any number of descriptions you could have had, but Sash Galuga really stepped up. And I think he was someone I was looking for more from throughout the course of the year. He had a really good game against McNeese, but other than that, hadn't been as consistent, I think, as some people would have liked. And he really showed up and showed out when getting his opportunity, especially with no Napper out on the floor, and to the tune of a whopping 37 points on very killer efficiency, might add 14 of 20 from the floor, 6 of 12 from three, and more or less the big time characteristic and superlative I can throw, tied for the second highest scoring output by any WCC player this year, only behind Ace Glass's 40 in Maui. So I think it really, all things considered, a really great night for Gavalugov, a great night for the Broncos more than anything. I mean, LMU is a team that has proven to be the thorn in the side of many, including USF recently, and even over the years for St. Mary's and Gonzaga, and even Santa Clara too, for that matter. And Broncos just went into the Levy Center off a very late night, coming back from Spokane, and just beat the hell out of them. And I think they deserve credit for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like you mentioned the fact that this was the bounce back game. You had Gonzaga just a couple nights ago, and that obviously, like, first half seemed okay. Second half got away from them. The fact that they were able to 2 nights later come back and play the way they did, be focused the way they were, and really never took their foot off the gas in this game. Like that was, I think, the one thing is you could maybe see, like, once they got up by 20 or so, maybe you start to take your foot off the pedal a little bit. LMU climbs back into it, makes it interesting. That never happened in this game. LMU was never really able to get back into this one. This was a pure domination by Santa Clara, and the Broncos are looking again like they had kind of established themselves early on as the very clear number 3 in this league, and I think that kind of reiterated what happened the other night, because you look at where Gonzaga is right now. Look at where St. Mary's is, still undefeated in league play, and now Santa Clara is right there with them, 5-1 in WCC play thus far. And I think the one thing is, again, like it's coming from a bunch of different spots, and I think going into a game against Santa Clara, you just never know who it's going to be. And I think that's one of the things that was even talked about during the broadcast, is that the Santa Clara team is so much deeper than maybe other Santa Clara teams we've seen in the past, that you can have a starter miss a game and then you get a performance like this. So the fact that Santa Clara was able to come back and really put it to LMU in this one says a lot for what I think we're going to see the rest of conference play. Again, good bounce back for the Broncos getting into this one.
Yeah, I think they played a lot of complimentary basketball. They won the rebounding battle, especially against a physical LMU team. They only committed 7 turnovers as a team. And like you mentioned, I think sometimes it's a double-edged sword when you don't necessarily have that go-to guy. And Elijah Mahi and Christian Heyman have done leaps and bounds along that front this year. It's not J-Dub, it's not Pods, and that's not a bad thing. It's just every team has a different identity. And for Santa Clara, it can be anybody on any given night, and they just let Sosh let it fly. And all the better for it in certain respects. I mean, you sit here and you look at it. I mean, Jake Ensminger didn't score a single point, but had 11 rebounds, and yet Santa Clara is winning by 30 plus points. You have Christian Hammond; he's had shot 3 of 10, had 8 points. Like it's a big deal in terms of all the complementary pieces that laid together, and they're setting themselves up for a nice week ahead. And they play Pacific, a team that they had did well against last year. And then you talk about the top 3 and stuff like that. If they want to prove to themselves, and not even the fan base, if they want to prove to themselves that they're contenders in this conference and can be a top 2 team, you get St. Mary's at home. I mean, you have everything you want right in front of you.
Exactly. That's the big one coming up. And St. Mary's, well, they held court as well this weekend. Their one single game of the week, they took care of business against Washington State at UCU Pavilion. And this was a game where we saw the reemergence of Mikey Lewis in the second half. 20 points for the sophomore. His 3-point shot looked a lot better, a lot more like we saw before he ended up getting banged up down in the Bahamas. So this was a good showing for Mikey in this one. We got 3 guys actually in 20 plus point scoring. Josh Dent among them. Also Paulus Morauskas again, kind of showing off what he can do. They were the 3-headed monster in this game. But the one thing I think that is something to note, like, yes, St. Mary's won the game. They won by 88-82. But Washington State hung around. And this was a game that St. Mary's led by 17 at one point. And Washington State made it interesting in the second half. They got within 4. They climbed back into it. They continue to have runs to make this more interesting. And if you go and look at the stats and everything else, like, there were a couple of key numbers that you're not used to kind of seeing St. Mary's be the one being beat up on. Points in the paint. St. Mary's got beat up in the paint by Washington State. They also, it was on the break where they also really struggled against the Cougs. And I have to give them a lot of credit because, again, we talked about how they'd been playing a lot better over the last few weeks, and they got down, and it didn't completely rattle them. Like, they were able to bounce back. They played a lot better in the second half. They turned this into a ball game late, and I think that bodes well for Washington State moving forward. Now, again, they have Gonzaga next, and that's going to be a tough task for them anyway. But the fact that they were able to hang around in there, the points in the paint, which, again, for even against Gonzaga, that's going to be a thing. They led that 40-16 against St. Mary's. So that wasn't like a little bit of an advantage. It was a big advantage. Also, they were only -3 on the glass overall. Washington State did a good job of making sure they were in it against St. Mary's. And that's a testament to what David Riley and his coaching staff did, the prep for this game and what they were able to kind of do. But against St. Mary's, they're off to that 5-0 start. They do have USF on Tuesday night on the Hilltop, so that will be a fun one to watch. And the Gaels continue to just handle their business. We know that Gonzaga game is looming in a few weeks, but of course, we know that they have to handle everything else before they get to that one.
Yeah, it's a big Bay Area week coming up for St. Mary's, USF, and Santa Clara. And, I'll start with some credit for Washington State as well. You mentioned the fast break points, 27-6. I mean, quite a bit. You're starting to see David Riley trying to just nudge his team into the identity he wants to play, especially on offense. And while, it could have gotten away from them very easily down 17, they just continue to kind of, take a rope when you're trying to climb a mountain. You're just slowly but surely trying to reel them back in and stuff like that. And while they didn't get the win, I was encouraged by some of what I saw. I thought Indy Okafor had a really solid game, all things considered. It's not often that you see a St. Mary's team giving up opposing field goal percentage higher than 50 against certain teams. Washington State shot over 50% from the floor. And at least for me, St. Mary's, kind of in a similar vein to Washington State to this point in the year, is they're doing things differently. Washington State leaned on defense, leaned on the interior to this point in the year. St. Mary's leaning on their offense. I think they really showed leaps and bounds. Dylan Shaw, Paulus Morauskas, and Mikey Lewis chief among them, and even Josh Dent playing a full 40 minutes, 6 of 9 from 3. He's done a really nice job stepping into his own, and they've risen as their offense has gone with it. And it's really been the defense is the place where it's like, okay, you really need to grow here to find the best version of yourself. I know you've noticed it. I know you've talked to me about it, and I think that's something where if I'm a team trying to nab one against St. Mary's, maybe you try and use that pace to your advantage and see to what extent have they improved on the defensive end of the floor while acknowledging that their offense is a lot better and you can still get burned by the Gaels. So at least for me, the way they're playing right now, it's leading to a little bit more variance that I think we're accustomed to seeing, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to lose very in sometime soon or anything like that.
The Achilles heels last year for St. Mary's were the free throw line and the 3-point line. They are among the best in the country in both those categories this year. And the game the other night, 14 made threes for St. Mary's, and at the free throw line, a perfect 20 for 20. Can't do much better than that. So St. Mary's doing it in a very different way from a year ago, the last couple of years. But this is still it's still a very tough St. Mary's squad, and now they will take on USF. And USF is starting to maybe look a little bit more like themselves over the last couple of weeks. Now, they did lose the game against LMU on Thursday, but they bounced back with a 20-point win at Pepperdine on Saturday. And in that one, we got the career night from Barry Wong, 27 points from the forward. Like that was one hell of a night. 7 for 9 from 3 for the big man. Both Tyrone Riley, David Fuchs with doubles in that one. And this is more the performance, the type of look that we were kind of hoping to see from USF. And even what we saw against LMU to an extent, even though they lost that game, there were more elements of that's the USF team we expected to see all year long. We saw the great night from Ryan Beasley. We saw the activity from a number of different spots on the team. Legend Smiley having a good night as well. And they're slowly still getting there. Obviously, this isn't perfect, but right now, like you look at where USF is in the standings, you think about where they were, just thinking about where they were just a few weeks ago. 4-2 in conference play, now sitting in fourth, right behind Santa Clara, and the Dons feel like they're putting it back together.
Yeah, I mean they rebounded well against Pepperdine, and I don't mean that from the literal glass. I'm just saying in general, like they a rebounding-esque performance, and one they had to have because Pepperdine, they're tired of losing, and two, Brian Beasley didn't even play in the game. So like it was a game where it can easily get away from you. You don't have your star guard who can initiate like that and the way he does it like that usually, and it can get difficult. And USF, for the most part, navigated it very well. I thought the bulk of the starters did very well, and I thought Venabosi, while he didn't yet get the shot volume compared to some games of the past, I thought he did a lot of the little things well in that game. You finally felt the breakout from Barry Wong, and we kind of know what he can bring on offense, especially from the perimeter. But we talked to him at media day. We've talked to Chris Grellison a lot. He's like, what's he going to give me on defense? And I think this was a game where he kind of put both together. And I think, can he continue to be consistent? Because sometimes, kind of in a similar vein to some of the other players on the Dons roster, sometimes you don't feel him out there. And I think a game, of course, yes, you feel him out there with 27 points, but you felt his presence, I'd say, more than anything. And you want to see if that can continue, especially against a big-time matchup in St. Mary's. And you mentioned, or at least for me, I've mentioned, I need more Tyrone Riley all the time. And he showed up against Pepperdine, to the tune of 19 points, or more than anything. I felt his force. And I think that's going to be the big question going forward, especially in the matchup whether you're listening to this today or on game day, like St. Mary's, you got to show up and get ready for a bar fight. I mean, you can't just sit there and let the physicality come to you. So I want to see Tyrone Riley assert himself even more than he did down in Malibu.
And you mentioned that game again. They meet on Tuesday on the Hilltop. They are the solo standalone WCC game on Tuesday night. So all eyes will be on this game. And the last 4 games, USF plus 17 in rebounding, plus 17, plus 17, plus 11, plus 16. They've been doing the work on the boards the last couple weeks, and that's what they're going to need to do and continue against St. Mary's. And St. Mary's, like most teams in the WCC, have actually game planned well on that specific front because you're going to have to rebound well. And while St. Mary's is still winning the overall rebounding margin victories, it's by smaller numbers than we're used to seeing. +4, +9, +3, +2. There is a +27 in there against Seattle U, but the other numbers, like teams are hanging around. LMU, Washington State. Pepperdine, Portland. Like all these teams have at least held their own on the glass for the most part. And that is at least one of the steps that you have to be able to get over on the Gaels. The other one is obviously you're going to have to shoot it well because now to the point of this is a different style of play from a St. Mary's squad. You might have to just straight out score this team because this isn't as much the drag it out, slow it down St. Mary's squad. This one's scoring 80 plus points a game. This one can light you up from three on a much more consistent basis. And so you have to be able to do a lot of things well to get this one. And remember, this was also the game last year. This was St. Mary's only WCC regular season loss was at USF. That was the only one a year ago. And it was by a single point. And St. Mary's did have an awful shooting night that night. They were 3 for 23 from three, which you would anticipate they're not going to do again this year with a different cast of characters. But this one is going to be a really hard fought matchup. I expect it to get really physical down low. Like I'm just picturing the jawing and the physicality that we're going to see between Morauskas and Fuchs on the post on Tuesday night. That one's going to be fun. And then of course, like the backcourt is going to be really fascinating. Again, hoping Ryan Beasley is back on the court, available for USF so that we could see him against this squad. Because he's had some big nights against St. Mary's, and it's going to be a different look. Obviously, going up against Josh Dent as opposed to the Augustus Marcialona. So different style. I think that we're going to see the matchup between Beasley and Dent, if that's what we end up seeing. And I think you were going to allude to this. The key, it's like thinking about what we get from Tyrone Riley is going to almost be kind of the swing here, because almost kind of know what we're going to get from a lot of the players at St. Mary's. It's what do we get from Tyrone Riley? Because if he can have a big night, he can hold his own, and he's going to, on both ends, defense and offense, that is what's going to really help USF potentially get the upset.
100%. And I think I want to, I'll sign myself up for some Bay Area bedlam. If we get just Beasley and Mikey Lewis going bucket for bucket with each other, like you got two Bay Area boys shining on the brightest stage, national TV, ESPN linear game, like I will sign up for that. And, I have so much to say. I will be at the Hilltop, so I'll be excited to, get myself up in gear. I know kind of one of those things where you're watching two, not even enemies, because we're both subjective about this league. It's like you're watching two of your biggest like peers going right at each other and saying, okay, let's go do it. Let's go have a 12-round prize fight. And I think it can be a good game, especially if it gets up tempo and you see, St. Mary's lean into that adjustment they've made to this season, and USF lean into the style that has worked in years past for them. So yes, like you mentioned, I want Ryan Beasley healthy for this matchup. Hopefully he's good to go. And like you mentioned, yes, Tyrone Riley, what are you gonna give me? What can you show me? And especially to the bigs of the Dons, like the challenge is you got Andrew McKeever and Harry Wessels, two of the biggest behemoths in this conference. Like you got to show up and show out, find a way. Like, cool, your measurements aren't as big. Cool, your mass isn't as big. That doesn't matter. You're expected to go out and perform anyway. Just because this is the type of moment that USF has proven that they can do on occasion. They beat St. Mary's last year on the Hilltop. So I'm looking at Guillermo Diaz-Graham, Barry Wong, Saba if he gets in the game. Like, let's go. Like it's time to go. There's no time to sit here and mope, woe is me. It's time to go seize your opportunity if you think you can do it.
It's also a huge opportunity when you think about what it could mean for the standings. Because I know we're still early. We're still in the first third of conference play, but a win here for USF puts them right back into the conversation, because again, like Santa Clara and St. Mary's meet on Saturday. And if USF is able to get a win and Santa Clara doesn't this week, now we're looking at USF has now caught up to the Broncos in the standings. And now we're going to have a little bit more of a fight right there for that 3 spot. And so I think it is a critical moment for USF. Not obvious, like getting over on St. Mary's is always a tough task. It's like you don't ever like say like, oh, it's going to happen. But this is an opportunity for both schools. This is an opportunity for both USF and Santa Clara to catch St. Mary's, because this is a tough back-to-back. Both these games are on the road for St. Mary's, and they have had their, not saying that they've struggled against these teams, because we've seen them just absolutely dominate both these teams, but both these teams have caught St. Mary's at least once in the last few years. So it's not like St. Mary's is completely unfamiliar with catching an L from either of these teams. it just doesn't happen all that often. But having the extra rest might help St. Mary's later in the week, but it's going to be short rest coming up here against San Francisco, and so we'll see what happens on Tuesday night in this one. But another team, another school that's kind of starting to make at least a little bit of movement is Portland and the Pilots. We have to kind of acknowledge what is happening up at Chiles Center because they have now won back-to-back games. And this is a team that while they had a couple of close calls and were unable to cash in early on in conference play, they have now won a couple straight games. They beat Pacific. They went out and then also got the game the other night against Oregon State. Second time in a row they've been able to get Oregon State at the Chiles Center. So they own that I-5 matchup between they and the Beavs. And I think the one thing it's nice to see that Portland seems to be having some moments because we know in the long term, like this Portland team is going to end up getting crushed by the top half of this league, but we are seeing moments from this squad. There are guys that you can look at and be like, hey, like you never know who it's going to be on a given night. Could be Joel Foxwell, could be Cameron Williams, it could be Matus Hronsky. Like it's coming from kind of in a number of different spots for you for Portland, and that's a great sign to see for them as they get deeper in the conference play because I think their play has at least moved them in my mind above at least a good number of the lower third of the conference.
Yeah, I'll get behind that. I'll co-sign that one, and I can't wait to the day we get Shantae on the show and he gets to give us crap over it because he's all to this point in the year they've earned the right to do so. Whether it was Jermaine Balasegar-Webb, Joel Foxwell, Cam Williams, everybody's kind of had their imprint at a certain point or another in these wins, and I think it even dates back to what they did against Kent State. Kent State having a good non-conference, and then Portland taking turn at the Chiles Center, and especially going to the Oregon State game. And I'll toot my own horn. And we remember on the unofficial WCC Live, I picked the Pilots. I said that they could beat the Beavers, and lo and behold, here we are. Because I think it's just one of those things where I think Shantae, at times you can notice I think he's a good blood in the water coach, and he can kind of like when he senses something's off, and especially with Oregon State and the way their variance is on the road, when Portland can go on runs at the Chiles Center, and I think they really gravitated towards that. And I know at least in this specific game, it felt like there was a stoppage every other possession, especially as both teams paraded to the free throw line. But Portland converting 30 of 34 foul shots, that'll play. And Cam Williams especially, I just loved his activity. I know 8 of 12 from the field stands out above all, but I think more than anything, I loved his activity, ability to make winning plays more than anything. And I think all things considered, you'll take it, especially because Joel Foxwell is still coming into his own, cut down from the 6 turnovers the other day against Pacific, only 1 turnover against the Beavs. And as a team, the Pilots only had 7 turnovers. So full credit to Portland for executing down the stretch, even in the mud against the Beavers and the pretty rough officiating both ways, we'll call it at times.
Yeah, so great to see with the Pilots being able to kind of do that. And before we kind of get to the previewing a little bit more of down the road this week, I do want to make sure that we acknowledge that the Pacific Tigers and how they were able to come back against San Diego the other night. That's being down 17 and coming back in that one. Isaac Jack was a huge part of the comeback. It felt like at one point he became the unstoppable force for the Tigers in the second half. We got a great night from TJ Wainwright in that one as well. He had 25 points. And I think that's the thing. It's like we need to see it come from the other guys more consistently with Pacific because pretty much like to this point, it's been all the focus is Elias Ralph. And kind of like their fortunes have almost kind of leaned on how well he's done on a given night. And on a night where he didn't have his best, others came through. And I think that's a good sign for Pacific. Again, also holding court at home. Like they're 8-0 at home at the Spano Center. So dangerous place to be heading into. They got their get-right game against San Diego, the revenge game against San Diego, because obviously that was one that left a bad taste in their mouth the first time around. That was almost going to be like a real painful loss that they ended up losing to San Diego again in that short turnaround. But yeah, the Tigers, they're 3-3. They're hanging out right there in the middle of the WCC. And I don't want to quite say that they've turned the corner. I think I need to see a little bit more out of Pacific, but they're at least starting to like. It feels like they're getting a little bit better, even if there's still some inconsistency from what we've seen.
Yeah, and I think the thing that stands out about that game is even as they're making their comeback, it was really the cumulative effect of the boards. Like Pacific was just leaning on San Diego really throughout the game, even with their missed shots, like on the boards, and eventually to the tune of a plus 18 rebounding margin by the end of the game. And I think that's where you felt San Diego wear down because Pacific, they couldn't buy a bucket at times, and USD, it almost felt like they couldn't miss at times. And then as you see that regression come to the mean for both teams, it's okay, what else can you do for me? And I think Pacific, especially on the boards, I mean, they just thrashed San Diego, especially to the tune of 21 offensive rebounds. Two guys with double figure boards and Wainwright and Justin Rochlin. So I think all things considered, that's exactly what you take if you're Pacific. Like that dirty work eventually paid off by the end of the game, especially San Diego started to struggle from the field more or less. So credit to Pacific for doing so. And like you, I'm also in agreement that yes, give me a little bit more. And if you can give me a little bit more all the time, especially from the non-Elias Ralph guys, Pacific could be doing pretty well.
Now, thinking about looking forward to this week, we've talked about St. Mary's at USF because obviously that's a big one. And we have 3 games on Wednesday, 2 games on Thursday. So there's a little bit of a broken up week before we do get a solid slew of games on Saturday. And I'm staring at these games, and the one I think I'm staring at right now is I'm very curious about Seattle, and they'll be hosting San Diego up at the Red Hawks Center, and they sit at 1-4. My concern with this squad is the rebounding because we talked about how like they've actually held their own in a lot of these games. They went toe to toe with Gonzaga. They played a solid 30 minutes against St. Mary's. They should have probably beaten USF. Then they fall flat against Oregon State, and now you're starting to think like, okay, well, did they just have a good few weeks, or are we going to see the team we thought we were going to see early on? Because right now, it's not looking good for Seattle. Right now, they have the second worst rebounding margin in conference play. Only San Diego is actually worse than they are. So maybe the matchup here might play in their favor, but they've got to be able to do a better job on the glass because that is where they are just getting killed. In addition to the fact that they have not shot it well. The last couple of games, like 30% against Oregon State. And obviously that will not get it done. But maybe some home cooking, maybe getting back there, a little bit of rest. They did not play on Saturday will help them out. And it's also they've gotten through the toughest part of the WCC schedule, or at least probably their toughest part of the conference play, getting St. Mary's, Gonzaga, USF in a 4-game span on the road for 3 of those games. Maybe we'll see the better version of Seattle U, and I think that's what I am looking to see if we do see come Thursday when they play San Diego.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those times where the first like fork in the road for Seattle U more than anything, because I talked about it, especially going towards the St. Mary's game, but even more so in the effects of that in the way they played against Oregon State is this is a wear and tear conference. You can't take a night off and it's like, okay, we got through Gonzaga, St. Mary's. Okay, who do we got next? Okay, we have Oregon State. We can show up. We'll play our brand of basketball. We'll be cool. And then that didn't happen. So I think that's the one thing for Seattle U is I do think that the bye paid dividends for them. And now you have to see it actually in action. I trust their defense to make things happen. And I think the one thing is that was one of our essential questions even before non-conference and when we were like previewing the seasons. It was never about their defense. Is how much can the offense come announce themselves to the party? And for the most part, throughout the year, they had. And then you see in a vacuum, down the stretch at Gonzaga, it didn't go so well. Down the stretch at St. Mary's, they got away from them. And then at Oregon State was the one where it's like, okay, now we may actually have to signal a bit of an alarm, so to speak, as to what Seattle U can be. And while I do think they're going to beat San Diego, and while I do think they're going to recover nicely over the course of these next couple games because they have made it through this stretch, albeit not where they want to be, I think they're a good enough team to, rise back up to the 4 or 5 slot in this conference. But it's going to take work. It really is going to take work, and all it takes is a couple more rough shooting nights against some opponents you think you can beat, and then we're talking about, oh man, Seattle U potentially a 6 or 7 seed or even an 8 seed if things don't go to plan.
In WCC play, they are shooting the worst amongst any conference team. Now, I will say this: looking at the opponent field goal percentage, Seattle U, they are second in the conference at holding opponents only shooting 40% from the field. 3 of their 4 losses are to the teams right around them in opponent field goal percentage: Gonzaga, St. Mary's, and San Francisco. So there might have been a reason why they were shooting so poorly for the most part against those teams. It's because they were playing some pretty good defenses as well. But they need a get right game. They need a little bit more consistent across the board. They've kind of had a good night here, a good night here. They need it to come from multiple sources on a consistent basis to be able to kind of climb back into this. And again, like I think this is a good stretch where when you think about what Seattle U is going to have coming up, like this is a softer part, even though yes, they do have Gonzaga again in the near future. It's a little bit softer. The fact that they'll see San Diego soon, they'll see Pepperdine, they'll see Portland, they'll see a little bit more of that bottom half. So there's opportunities for them to kind of have those get right games before they start to see the top half again later on in conference play. Now, looking at the other ones, I mean, I don't know, looking at the others, Portland at Pepperdine, LMU at Oregon State. Like, I feel like LMU at Oregon State is, I don't want to keep saying we're at crossroad games because like this one, I feel like it go either direction. LMU needs a get right game. Oregon State needs a get right game. And these two are, at least Oregon State is very Jekyll and Hyde, and LMU historically has been a little bit more Jekyll and Hyde, maybe less so this year in their quality of play, home versus road. But I think this is one where LMU just has to get this one because they need to kind of get back into the win column, get back right. And they've come so close on the road a few different times. This feels like one that like they just kind of have to get if they're going to climb back into a conversation, maybe even getting into 4th place once you get to the end of conference play.
Yeah, you just have to find. I think the easiest operating phrase to roll with right now is just have to find a way. And especially when you think of the ramifications of what that Washington State game was a couple of weeks ago, I think this is exactly the type of game you look at it now. You're 2-4. Both the Lions and Oregon State are picking themselves up off the mat after respective losses. And, in terms of the way we view those programs, that we expect LMU to be beating Oregon State. I think that goes without really much of a debate more than anything, because Oregon State, they have proven they're not the team that they were last year and really far from it. LMU, we've been saying, are they good enough to say that they've graduated to the next tier? And yes, you got the win against USF, but you didn't respond well after that. You got pasted by Santa Clara, had a good first couple minutes against Gonzaga, then that went awry. You couldn't get the close one versus St. Mary's down the stretches before Rory Hawk clutch 3. So I think for LMU, yeah, I agree. You've got to have it. Got to find a way. It doesn't matter how ugly it gets. If you win a 50-49 game, so be it. Get out there and get out of Corvallis and run at that point. But I'm looking at this game and I'm thinking, okay, LMU, are you who you say you are, or are you gonna let that Santa Clara loss after that USF win kind of linger a little bit more and more? And if you're Oregon State, I think we've kind of learned they're not the same team that they are at home versus the road. And so we'll see what version of the beef shows up, because even at home they've been a little bit more variance this year. I look at the back of that Santa Clara game; that was a disaster from the very beginning.
Yeah. So. That's maybe the other game. I mean, I don't know if there's any of the other games that are on the docket for the before Saturday that you're looking at, because Pacific at Santa Clara feels like that's one that Santa Clara should be able to handle. It feels like that Gonzaga at Washington State, as much as I think that Washington State has played better, like the Zags, if the game against Santa Clara is any indication, like I don't think they're refocused. I don't think that they're going to have, unfortunately, a whole lot of problem down at the Palouse, even though there's going to be obviously that's going to be the growing rivalry now that they will be in the same conference, obviously, again next year going into the new Pac-12. Because I do another topic, but is there do you want to kind of touch on any of those, or are we good to just keep it rolling?
I think I'll just say this, just to keep it very brief, is that I want to see how Portland can continue this kind of stretch of play before they host St. Mary's again, because I'd say 3 of their next 4 games are very entirely winnable. I think at Pepperdine, that's one that you're going to want to get. At LMU, I mean, I don't think that's not a game where it's all hope is lost. I think Portland can go in there and win that game if they get the right set of circumstances. You come home to face St. Mary's, I don't think they're going to beat St. Mary's. Then you go back on the road against Pacific. The Tigers very good at the Spano Center, as you mentioned. So if for Portland, I really want to see what the game against Pepperdine serves for these next 4 games, because I think they can put together a nice stretch of hoops. And I really think that, you want to see if this momentum is something, and you talk about how they could be really better than the lower third. That's a game that you're going to want to have to nab. It doesn't matter that it's on the road. You got to go beat Pepperdine, and you can avoid being on day 1 of this conference tournament.
And speaking of the conference tournaments, thank you for the perfect segue there. There were changes that were announced by the President's Council of the WCC. They met last week or a week and a half or so ago, and they made a number of announcements. And one of the changes that is coming, obviously, as the WCC is going to have a membership shift in the next 12 months, Denver coming in, Gonzaga out, Oregon State out, and Washington State out. That means that we are going to see some changes to the WCC tournament. And right now, the changes are going to be 7 through 10. They're playing day 1. We know that this is going to happen. So they'll play the first day in Vegas. And then, or I guess I shouldn't say Vegas yet, because we don't know exactly where it will be as of yet. But day 1 of the tournament, 7 through 10 will play. And then on day 2, we have a traditional 8-team tournament. The WCC will be going back to a traditional format moving forward. So that means that the double, triple bye system that the WCC has implemented over the last X number of years is gone. They will not run that system anymore. And so we knew that was kind of like very Gonzaga focused on why that was the case. And no, Gonzaga means we are moving back. Obviously, the format has also benefited St. Mary's quite a bit, as well, as they essentially, Gonzaga and St. Mary's have been the only two who've really kind of been in those 2 slots for going straight to the semis, sans a couple of appearances from BYU over the years. But it was a system that largely benefited St. Mary's and Gonzaga. And now with no Gonzaga, we are moving back to a traditional system, which is going to give probably more opportunities for a lot of the other squads to get deeper and deeper into the WCC tournament.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel like St. Mary's may feel some type of way about it. I don't pretend to know that I know everything happening over in Moraga. I know you have a very good in the know about that, but I imagine Roger Thompson was probably a bit of a no. Mike Matoso probably a bit of a no when it came to that. But for me, I think for those of you who are trying to wonder, like, what do you envision the system as, just think of it as the old Pac-12 tournament and stuff like that, and going forward. I do think it lends more credence to a team getting hot at the right time and actually being able to sustain it versus 6 wins in 6 days or 5 wins in 5 days, depending on when you start, and just really that just not being very sustainable. And I take a look at that, and if I'm Randy Bennett, I'm like, man, like I want to wait. I can wait on my preparation. Now I have to turn around three games in 3 days or whatever that may be, and that's honestly probably one of the only small situations in a vacuum where he's not at his best, where he likes to have the time to prepare and likes to have time to basically get ready to suffocate your offense. This could be a time where another team does get hot, and maybe that's where you see LMU find a way to make something happen going forward. And at least for me, I've heard that there have been talks of moving things over in terms of conference tournament location. It's not official or anything like that, but I know the conference athletic directors got a tour of Lee's Family Forum in 2025, so that's going to be something of note going forward. Like, how does the plan work with the Orleans Arena? Do they choose to extend? Do they make the move to Henderson and go to Lee's Family Forum? And at least in my case, Santa Clara better learn how to play in Lee's Family Forum if that's the case. They're 0-3 and have not looked very good in any of those games. So that is everyone's got their cursed arena, and for the Broncos, that is so far it. So if the conference tournament does move there, well, we'll see how that goes.
I mean, it is going to lend itself because I know like there's going to be excitement for a lot of the fan bases, good and bad, as far as like no Gonzaga, no Washington State, no Oregon State. I know some fans are like, no Gonzaga means we have a chance, and of course, and that's going to be a big thing. Like thinking about that, one of the big barriers to getting to the NCAA tournament is gone is a big deal. Now you can say that, well, Gonzaga obviously helped a lot on bringing money into the conference and notoriety and everything else, and that is all true. You cannot undersell the value that Gonzaga had brought to the WCC over the last 25 years because of how dominant they have been in all of college basketball. But at the same time, like their dominance is their dominance plays a part in what we've seen, unfortunately, programs like Pepperdine, San Diego, Portland, unable to be able to break through. Like stepping it back, like nobody in the WCC outside of St. Mary's and USF have made the NCAA tournament since 2008. That's I think the one thing that is a big part to when you think about the opportunities that are going to present itself moving forward. This is the opportunities that everyone else sees. Now San Diego has a chance. Santa Clara has a better chance. LMU has a better chance. Pepperdine has a better chance. Portland has a better chance. Because the elephant in the room, the monster under the bed is no longer there. You don't have to. And also, again, like the way the system was set up, essentially it's your path to an auto bid to the NCAA tournament was you had to beat St. Mary's and Gonzaga on consecutive nights.
Yeah, that's
and
easy.
even for the best of teams in the country, good luck trying to do that on back-to-back nights.
So easy, Zach. I mean, clearly you have to have an easy. You couldn't have an easier task than doing that. But I think more than anything, and the one thing I want to add to your point is it actually gives fans of other teams more of a reason to go. So, for example, if you think of San Diego and say you're starting on day one in this current form of the staggered start tournament, well, you're cannon fodder by day 3. And then it's like, is it worth making the investment to go out, use your allotment of tickets, spend time, spend money? Because Las Vegas is not a cheap industry. Whereas in Henderson, the more compact it is, the more of that perceived chance that you feel. And I think it actually gives more of these fan bases to some incentive to actually get out there and see, okay, it's not okay, we'll see if my team makes the semifinals, then I'll go. It's like, no, we're potentially starting in the quarters and we just got to get hot and we can go find a way to get it done. So I think, at least for me, the initial investment in the perceived investment, I think sticks out more than most. And, giving a team that maybe that would have been in a 10 or 11 seed and starting on day one in front of hundreds of fans now saying, okay, we're going to start in the quarterfinals and we can find a way to, get hot from 3 or play some stifling defense and get our way to our first big dance this century.
Exactly. So the opportunity will be there in the new version of the WCC for a lot of teams. St. Mary's still around. So, of course, there's still one of the giants, one of the behemoths still lurking and still have to get by them. But it does feel like for a lot of the fan bases, there's a chance. There's more reason to be excited about going to the WCC tournament without Gonzaga as much. Again, Gonzaga's dominated this tournament, dominated the conference for the last quarter century. We get that. We understand that. The respect is there, but the other teams will now feel like there's a shot, and that more than anything is going to be benefit. It's good. That's if there's the one benefit to look at, it's that going forward for the WCC. Now, and with that, we'll wrap it up. So be sure to hit the subscribe button, follow along on social media at unofficial WCC Pod. That's Thomas. I'm Zach. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we will catch you later.